So here we have our Mod 19 group test. I'm going to go through this with you. The first 4 questions were just asking me to write an equation of the graph that's shown. Now, one thing that's easy to get a few points from is when we remember that the domain for all of these is all real numbers. So I'm going to go fill those in just to make sure I get those points. Now, if I look at number 1, the range should be fairly easy to pick out as well, because the lowest point on this is at 1, and the highest point at this is at 5. So, when I write my range would be -1 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to, I'm sorry, that should be +1. Let's fix that. +1. +1 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to 5. So that should be my my range. My amplitude and period, I'm going to find that out when I find my midline. So if I look, bottommost point is at 1, uppermost point is at 5, halfway between 1 and 5 would be 3. So I'm identifying that my midline is right there. So if my midline is at 3, that means the amplitude means it goes up 2 and down 2. So my amplitude is 2. So let's see. Period. If I look at the y-axis, we're starting at the bottom. Now the bottom's a little tricky because that means it's cosine, because it's only going to be sine if it starts at the middle. But since it's starting at the bottom instead of the top, that means it's not just cosine, it's negative cosine. And I'm writing the amplitude right in front of the cosine as well. Let's see. So bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. That is the end of one period, and that says 720 degrees. So the period for this one is 720 degrees. Now, how do I find what's going on here? Well, I got to deal with my theta here. I do know that since I have a midline at 3, after I deal with my theta, I'm going to have a +3 at the end. So, to find the period, dealing in degrees, that means that 360 divided by whatever b is gives you that period of 720. So to solve for b, I'm going to multiply both sides by b. That means 360 equals 720b divided by 720, and b equals 1/2. So if I put theta times 1/2, that means I have theta over 2. So there's my equation and all of my appropriate information there. Number 2, my domain is all real numbers. My range, it looks like we're going from -3 on the bottom up to +3 on the top. So -3 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 3. And halfway between -3 and 3 is 0. So my midline is right here at 0. We don't have a k value that shifts it up or down at all, and that's kind of helpful. Now at the y-axis, we're in the middle, which tells me we have a sine graph. Let's see, it looks like it goes up 3 and down 3, so my amplitude is 3. And my period, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, that's 8 pi is the period there. So I have a sine graph. Middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, that's regular sine, so I'm going to put my positive amplitude in front of that. And then, let's see, so 2 pi divided by b is equal to the period. Well, we found the period to be 8 pi. So I'm going to multiply by b. 2 pi is equal to 8 pi b. Divide by 8 pi. And b is equal to 1/4. So when I put theta with 1/4, I get theta over 4, and that's the end of that equation because there's no midline shift. Okay, number 3, down here. Let's see, range, it looks like we're going from -3 to -1. So -3 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to -1. -1. Halfway between -3 and -1 is -2. So my midline has been shifted down to -2. So that shows me that my amplitude, it's going up 1 and down 1. So my amplitude is 1. And that also tells me that when I get my sine or cosine thing, that afterwards I'm going to have a -2 as my k value. The period, middle, bottom, middle, top, middle. Well, that's a sine curve because it's starting in the middle, but it happens to be a negative sine curve because it's going to the bottom. So instead of putting 1 sine, I would have -1 sine, which we just write as negative sine, if I can spell here. And now I got to figure out the period. So middle, bottom, middle, top, middle, ends right here. Bummer. That doesn't end at a nice place, does it? Oh, that's not where it ends. It ends here. Oh, good. That's a better place. So that ends at 120 degrees. That's the period right there. 120 degrees. So 360 divided by b gives me that period of 120 degrees. Multiply by b, and 360 equals 120b. Divide by 120, and b equals 3. So right here I have 3 theta. And there's my equation there. Okay. All right, last one like this. It looks like my midline is still right at 0. So just like the one above it, it's not going to have a k value at the end. My range, it looks like it's going from -6 up to +6. So -6 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to +6. At the y-axis, it is at the top. That means I have a cosine graph. And it's going top, middle, bottom, middle, top. So I just need to know that. Looks like the period is 2 pi. I forgot to mention the amplitude. It looks like it's going up 6 and down 6, which makes the amplitude 6. And since it's starting at the top, that's our regular cosine, so it's going to be 6 cosine, not -6 cosine. There's not going to be any k value at the end because the midline hasn't changed. And I take 2 pi divided by b is equal to that period, which is 2 pi. Now, you should be able to see here that it's just going to be 1. But if you can't see it, do it just like the other ones. Multiply by b. So 2 pi equals 2 pi b. Divide by 2 pi in order to get b by itself. And b is equal to 1. So 1 theta would just look like that. All right. Next ones, 5 and 6 should have been the easiest problems on the test. Find the amplitude of the function. Remember, the amplitude is just this number right there. So my answer here is A, 1/2. Right here, my amplitude is right here. Now that's a trick one. My amplitude cannot be negative. So even though -8 is an option, the negative just tells me whether I'm switching the tops and the bottoms. But it's not part of the amplitude. So my amplitude is actually D, or 8 here. Okay, now I have degrees finding the period. So in degrees, I do 360 divided by b. In this case, b is 3, and 360 divided by 3 is 120 degrees. Over here, 360 divided by b, b is actually 1/4 here. And you can do that on your calculator if you want to. 360 divided by 1/4 is 1440 degrees. So D would be my answer there. Okay. Turning the page. Now we're using radians. So same as 7 and 8, I'm just going to do 2 pi divided by b instead of 360 divided by b. B is 1/5. And 2 pi divided by 1/5 is actually 10 pi. So the period here is 10 pi. And the last one, 2 pi divided by b. B is 5. 2 pi doesn't divide by 5 nicely, so we're just going to leave it as 2 pi over 5. And that's my result there. So now we're on to our last 6 questions that are on my graphs. You'll notice there's no spot for you to put domain or range or amplitude or period. You do not need to list that on these ones. We already asked you those questions over here. Here's where you're going to get credit for those. You do need to know them in order to graph it accurately. So, let's see. First thing I'm going to do, let's see, we're using degrees for these two. That's important to know. So we're going to be doing 360 divided by b to find all of our periods here. I have a k value of positive 2. So I'm going to come up to positive 2. I have a couple different ways I could do this. I could come up to 2 and draw my line if I wanted to count by ones, but since my amplitude is 1/2, I'm going to kind of think ahead. I'm going to call that 1 and that 2. So that way I'm kind of giving each line representing a half. Now you don't have to, I just like spreading it out a little bit so that it's easier to see. And then that top line then would be 3. So if I space it like this, so I have my midline at 2 there. So when I go up to 2.5, I'm going to be going up 1 line. And when I go down to 1.5, I'm going to be going down 1 line. Now if I had just counted by 2s, I would only be going halfway. I would not go fully down a whole line there. Okay, so again, I've seen that my amplitude is 1/2. I'll keep that in the mind right there. I know that sine is middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And I know that my period is going to be 360 divided by 4. Well, 360 divided by 4 is 90. So I like labeling my x-axis down here. Excuse me, just because it gets a little bit squishy up in there with all the grid lines and everything. So half of 90 is 45 degrees. And half of 45 is 22.5. Put my degree markers. And halfway between 45 and 90 is actually 67.5. Now that one's not my favorite because you get the decimals, but it's not too bad. At least we're only doing 1 period of it. So there are my markings. I'm going to go middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And I'm going to draw in my graph, just like that. So there's that one. Next one, still in degrees, and I do have a k value again. So this time my k value is -2. So this one I am going to count by ones because my amplitude is big enough that I can. So -2 is where my midline is. My amplitude is 3, so I need to be able to get 3 above there, which would be at 1, and 3 below there. 1, 2, 3 would be at negative what? -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So this will be where my minimums are, where my bottoms are. My tops will be at 1, also known as my maximums. Let's see, I have cosine, which is my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. TMBMT. However, my amplitude is negative, which means that's going to become a B, that's going to become a T, and that's going to become a B. And finally, the period, 360 divided by B. B is 1/2, and 360 divided by 1/2 is 720. So 720 goes right there. Half of 720 is 360. Now on your test it's going to be spaced out a little bit more between that one and the next question, so it won't be as squishy there. Half of 360 is 180. And halfway from 360 to 720 is 540. So now I do my bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. And again, make sure to curve those ends up, showing that the period does continue in either direction, and it'll curve back up on both sides. All right, done with those two. My next two graphs, it says to graph them using radians. Now the only thing that really affects is how I'm going to label my x-axis. Everything else is the same. I do have a k value that's -1, and my amplitude is not a half or not a fraction, so I don't need to worry like I did up there. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my midline right in there at -1. I'm going to label -1. My amplitude is 3, +3. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 up, and that's 2. and 1, 2, 3 down, and that's -4. So those are my 1, 2, 3, yeah, -4. Those are my maximum and minimum values. So let's see, I have sine, which is middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And since the amplitude has a positive sign in front of it, I don't need to change any of my tops and bottoms, so I will use that pattern. And to find the period, I have to do 2 pi over b. b is 2, which means that the period is pi. So pi goes right there. This would be half pi, or pi over 2. Half of a half would be pi over 4. So I have 1 pi over 4. That's the same as 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. So this is 3 pi over 4, and then 1 pi. Draw in my middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. Now, one thing that you do need to be aware, as you're drawing in these curves, make sure they are curves. There are some people that tend to get very, what's the right word that I'm looking for? Very straight with their lines there, and they end up with something like that. So they get the middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, but it's almost like they're graphing line segments, not an actual curve. These are actually curved things. They are not rigidly, they don't have vertices at the top and the bottom like that, like we're used to, like you'd be graphing a line. So make sure you're curving them and not just graphing them as, you know, very pointy. Okay, next one in radians. +3 is where my midline is. So again, there's +3, so there's my midline. And I need to be able to go up 2 from there. That would put me at 5. And down 2 from there, which would put me at 1. Now I have a cosine again, so that's top, middle, bottom, middle, top. And since it's a negative, I do need to change the tops to bottoms and bottoms to tops. Excuse me. So, period would be 2 pi divided by b. b is 1/4. And 2 pi divided by 1/4 is 8 pi. So I have 8 pi. Half of that would be 4 pi. Half of that would be 2 pi. So 2 pi, 4 pi. This would be 6 pi, and then 8 pi. So, bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. And that's what my graph looks like there. All right, last 2 problems. We need to graph 2 full cycles. So 2 periods of these. Label both axes appropriately, just like we did up there. Now, this one does specify within the problem whether to use degrees or use radians. So the first one we're going to use degrees. The second one we will use radians. Now, if you'll notice, there is no vertical shift. There's no k value. So I don't need to worry about a midline being anywhere other than just on the axis right here. So my amplitude is 4, so that means I am going to be going up to 1, 2, 3, 4, and down to -4. So I do need to be aware of that. The period would be 360 divided by b. b is 1/2. 360 divided by 1/2 is 720, I believe. Right? Verify, I'm checking because my answer key says something different, but it is entirely possible that I made a mistake on my answer key. 360 divided by 1/2 is 720. Yep, gotta fix that on my answer key. So 720, I do not put 720 out here though because I'm doing 2 periods. So 720 is actually right in the middle. And then twice 720 would be over here. Well, what's 720 times 2? 1440. So that's what actually goes at the end because I've got 2 periods going on here. So going back to 720, if I divide that by 2, 360 is the marking right there. Divide that by 2 again. I divided by 180 because I knew the answer was 180. 360 divided by 2 gives me 180. So that first marking being 180 means they're adding 180 to get to every next number. So 180 plus 180, there's my 360. plus another 180 means the next line over is 540. Then I have 720. And there it is. If I add another 180, I get 900 for my next marking. Plus another 180 is 1080. Plus another 180 is 1260. Plus another 180 should get me to that 1440, and I've got everything evenly spaced. Whew. Okay, so we have cosine and a positive amplitude, so we're going to be using Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we do not need to change the tops to bottoms or vice versa. So we are just going to do top, middle, bottom, middle, top. Now I do not do top again for my next cycle. I use this top that was the end of the first cycle. It is now this top at the beginning of the second one. So I'm going to go back to middle, bottom, middle, and top again. So as I draw this in, be careful, you don't need to draw it in too fast. I don't know if you can hear the band practicing out my window. Lovely beat to my music here. All right, so there's my graph with 2 full periods. And the next one, we have sine, that's middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. However, we have a negative in front of our amplitude, which means the top has to become a bottom, and the bottom has to become a top. Using radians, I have 2 pi divided by b. b is 2, which means that the period is pi. So, I'm going to call this middle line pi. The end will then be 2 pi. So, if I cut pi in half, now pi is really 1 pi. So I'm going to take 1, I'm going to cut it in half, and I get 1/2. If I go to fractions, that's 1/2, which I call pi over 2. Now, I don't deal with the pi's on my calculator because it's going to get all messy with decimals. I just know that I have to put a pi in it when I come back over here. Now, if I divide 1/2 in half again, I get 1/4, so that's pi over 4. So that tells me, just like over here they're counting by 1/80s, here they're counting by 1/4. So if I add 1/4 to that, I get the 1/2. If I add another 1/4 to that, I get 3/4, so that's 3 pi over 4. If I add another 1/4, there's my 1 pi, plus another 1/4, I get 1 1/4. Let me change that to an improper fraction. That would be 5 pi over 4. Adding another 1/4, 1 1/2, so I'm going to change that to an improper fraction. That's 3 pi over 2. Plus 1/4 one more time. Gets me 1 3/4. As an improper fraction is 7 pi over 4. And if I add 1/4 again, I should end up at my 2 pi. Yes. So I should be good there. Okay, my amplitude is 1/2. Now again, 1/2 is a little tricky. I'm going to call this line 1 and this line -1. So that way when I do 1/2, it's actually all right here in this middle line right here. So, here we go. Middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And again, this middle, which is the end of my first cycle, is going to now be the first one of my second cycle. So I don't do middle again. I go on to... I did that wrong, didn't I? Shame on you, Franken. Okay, middle, bottom, middle, top, middle. I forgot to change my bottoms and my tops. So ignore these 2 points right there. They were wrong. I did not flip them. So there's the first cycle. Now I'm going back to bottom, middle, top, middle. That's what my graph should look like. Whew, almost did that one backwards. So that's what my graph should look like. Let's see, your test is tomorrow. Happy studying.